Welcome to our channel with amazing stories from life. We wish you a pleasant listening experience. Adriana has completely forgotten what a vacation is. There is no such term in her life, and that's it. I don't care what you say, she always has. Something prevented her from having a rest, raising a son, taking care of her parents, righteous labor at work. And after Adriana took a well-deserved vacation, she threw all her energies into the agrarian issue, her nice 600 acres. But it is both pleasant and useful. Labor on the beds is almost a vacation. Ethan will be here soon. He works in the city. That's when their evening ritual begins. She and her husband will sit on the terrace, pour themselves a decoction of linden leaves that Adriana prepared according to her grandmother's recipe, without lamb. That's what we can call simple human happiness. And if they were in the mood, the couple would leave the cute little farm called Aprikosov and go for a walk on the bluest sea. Do you remember Pushkin's poem? How great it is to live by the sea. Strictly speaking, this is the dream of Adriana's youth. Her most cherished dream. She remembers closing her eyes and dreaming of just such a way of life. Quiet, measured, unhurried. How wonderful it is to sit on the shore, look into the vast horizon, and think about the eternal, no matter how pathos it may sound. There's a great movie called Reach for Heaven. There, the whole theme is built just around the sea, about that world, where the talk is only about the sea. And having seen this movie, Adriana was so impressed that afterwards she walked for a long time. Amazed, Adriana was a born hostess. This gift was inherited from her mother and grandmother. They were craftsmen. They baked pies, pancakes, shields. Adriana knew how to make do with a minimum of products to prepare this sumptuous dinner. And if there were plenty of products, then no doubt the table would be like in an elite restaurant. The very fact of cooking brought Adriana just incredible pleasure, akin to contemplating her favorite sea. Charles, who worked in the city's power grid, always came home in anticipation of a wonderful evening. He knew for sure he was welcome home. And isn't that the height of happiness? Quiet family evenings with his wife are the real nirvana and meaning of life for any man of his age. Looking at these people, one could not imagine that they had gone through serious trials. And they happened not so long ago. Adriana grew up in the most ordinary family, which 1,000 salaries in our country. Her grandmother, Emily, and her mother always brought her up to be a real whole person, and always hinted at the fact that you just need to study hard to reach the heights in life. And so it was, when her classmates went on recess or simply sat on the windowsills. Adriana studied books. Their topics ranged from children's fairy tales to stories about animals and space. Adriana loved to read. Adriana's father, Benjamin, was rarely at home. He held some post in the Committee on Geology and Subsoil Development and practically lived in the service. Adriana saw him only on weekends, but even in these short meetings, Benjamin preferred to relax, simply sitting with a newspaper or going fishing with his friends. So Adriana was raised by her grandmother. She worked all her life as an accountant at the factory and now was retired. Our mom worked as a medic, so she could not give her daughter a lot of time. Too much in demand was her profile of pediatrics. But weekends were a culinary idyll. Adriana was sent to the market while the dough was finishing, and there the girl bought vegetables, fruits, various seasonings. The only thing that she was not trusted to buy fish and meat. Grandmother took it upon herself. The pies turned out delicious, incredibly puffy, even if the stomach was full. My hand would reach for more? In the end, her belly became like a drum. Adriana didn't need anything, not toys, not books, not outfits and shoes. It was her parents who took it upon themselves to compensate for the lack of attention given to her. A curious character also played its part. Adriana studied only on 4 and 5. thus pleasing her parents and teachers. At the school, there was a nursery of quite an impressive size. On the basis of this nursery, there was a lot of things. There were rabbits, silly hamsters, guinea pigs, fish and turtles. There was even a huge red cat nicknamed Behemoth. So called him Sam, who was in charge of the mini kennel and at the same time was a watchman. Adriana was very embarrassed by the fact that Behemoth was a redhead. This is before those of Bulgakov's master and Margarita. Everyone knows that the legendary Behemoth was the color of a crow's wing. Sam replied that it's okay. Bulgakov has his own cat, and he has his own. And so it was settled. Adriana spent all her free time in the kennel, and everyone around her decided that she would become a zoologist. However, despite her love for fauna, Adriana had long ago chosen her path into finance. It was quite calculating and pragmatic, plus a sure piece of bread for every day. Especially her grandmother was in the industry.
So there was someone to fall in love with the complex science of numbers, formulas, and equations. In the United States, that was the name of the institution to which Adriana applied. Let you not be confused by this abbreviation. It stands for Higher School of Economics, the city's most elite institution. By the way, we forgot to mention it. Adriana was born in a town called Falcon. Before that, the town was called Gregor. It was he who laid it down while traveling to the south of the country. However, enough of the history. Let's get back to our heroine. The first pancake did not become a pancake when Adriana entered her alma mater. Of course, she passed the entrance exams easily and simply, as if playing. The name Williams proudly topped the list of students who were accepted. Adriana was very proud of her absentee last name.
Her grandmother said that they were hereditary noblemen, and their ancestors included Jack Williams himself, Field Marshal General and Governor General of Novorossiya and Bessarabia. He was a member of the Council of State and chairman of the cabinet. Adriana willingly believed it. Who wouldn't be pleased to have such famous roots? Adriana immediately became everyone's favorite. She was the real soul of the company, as they say. The girl was good-looking, intelligent, and very charismatic. No wonder she had a lot of suitors. Adriana, on the other hand, wasn't interested in affairs of the heart. All her thoughts were occupied only with studies. Career first, she thought, and the male sex will definitely wait for her. Adriana divided all men into pals and strangers. With pals, she socialized nicely, and with strangers, she was simply unfamiliar. That makes sense. Guys immediately had the instinct of a conquering hunter. For them, it was already a matter of honor to conquer the heart of Adriana, unapproachable, like a fortress, Ishmael. How amusing it was sometimes to see them arguing over Adriana in high tones. The sharing of the skin of an unkilled bear, as the girl herself jokingly called this process. What's there to argue about? She didn't give anyone a reason to argue about her. Not even the slightest. But the guys did try, but that was their own business. Adriana has suddenly discovered a huge potential for organizational skills. She just fountains with this process. She needed to get everyone's dossiers together, find out all the birthdays, and so on. A database, so to speak. At the same time, Adriana collected money for gifts, events, concerts. It was a rhythm of life she enjoyed. In those days, young people didn't know about the now fashionable stand-up genre. But that's okay, because there were KVN, Kapusniki, discos under the incendiary rhythms of disco. And what are the fun trips to harvest potatoes worth? And everywhere Adriana was in charge of all the organizational activities. In the third year, Adriana became a real star of the faculty. How many offers to moonwalk and go to the club can't be counted? Adriana politely declined these offers. Her status as a coveted roadside attraction was firmly entrenched. It was such a forbidden fruit that guys would tear their hair out of their heads in frustration. Adriana firmly set herself the goal of a successful career, an apartment, a comfortable car, and a red color. She wanted to achieve all this on her own, without any help from her beau, and she was confidently moving towards this goal. In the same educational institution, but only on the manager, studied a kid with a sonorous name, Charles. He was quite fast, handsome, and sharp-tongued. Captain of the local team called the Devil's Advocate, he was a famous womanizer and heartbreaker. Charles was an excellent student, but lazy. He knew he had invisible armor. Who else would make such sparkling jokes at KVN balls? His philosophy was simple. If you want to win a prize, you have to give credit. The teachers knew this and didn't torture him much. The honor of an elite school is worth more than a failing grade? Charles. The guy had a sad fate, which can hardly be envied. The fact is that his father left him and his mother when she was 3 years old. She worked at the local theater. Dressing room attendant. Needless to say, Charles ate nothing sweeter than a carrot as a child. Charles lived in a tiny room in a huge communal theater. That was his mother's inheritance. The guy could not boast of great wealth. However, Charles had only excellent grades, thanks partly to his brains and partly to his sparkling humor. Adriana knew this guy very well. They crossed paths at events. It was Adriana who organized all the KVN tournaments and other social events for Adriana. Charles did not allow himself to be indecent. On the contrary, he behaved like a hussar from books or an aristocrat, a hereditary noblewoman. Williams was very flattered by this. They had very nice conversations about books, which they both loved passionately, about movies. Both were passionate movie buffs. Adriana discovered that Charles loved the theater, which is quite rare. It was exotic for a guy. Charles could spend hours discussing Smoktunovsky's work, his portrayal of Hamlet, or Chekhov's plays. This subject was also close to the girl. Adriana noted to herself that conversations with Charles were dragging her more and more, as if into a quagmire. But it was a pleasant quagmire, like a sweet book. These conversations began to be noticed by classmates. They were immediately labeled as having a closer relationship than just conversations. Soon they were being referred to as Romeo and Juliet. Charles, sharp-tongued, blushed, and for the first time did not know what to say. Adriana laughed homerically at this laughter. Shoma was at a loss, not knowing what to do. To tell the truth, Adriana had long ago become the rulers of Charles's thoughts, but he was embarrassed to say it out loud. His eagerness at the sight of the girl vanished like gas. Adriana thought of Charles as a good buddy, just like the rest of the boys. Charles sighed. Of course Adriana didn't want him. What did he have? Absolutely nothing. People like Adriana choose guys by the number of zeros in their bank account, by the make of their car, by the number of square meters in their apartment. His square footage was 12 squares. Of transportation, Charles has 2 legs and assets equal to 5 cents. Most likely, Adriana will choose a representative of the so-called golden youth, and there are plenty of them at school. Charles has developed such an inferiority complex. But even if Charles decides to win the heart of not to a C, he will have to make mountains at least, or win the lottery for $1,000. The chance of that, of course, was 0. So, what does he have to offer? 12 square feet, his own 2 feet, and a maximum of 25 cents in cash. Not much, although Charles could still offer his sharp mind, his love of film and theater, his absolute knowledge of Chekhov's work. But would Adriana be able to put that on herself or put it on bread? Probably not. All these suggestions were so ephemeral and insignificant that Charles felt ashamed of himself. Charles sighed and lived according to the principle that if you can't push yourself off the floor, your arms don't hurt. But Adriana was of a completely different opinion. It was the guy's minimalism that had its own unique charm for her. The third year ended, and the session loomed on the horizon. For many students, it was an Egyptian execution, nothing less. But Charles kept an Olympian calm. He would be fine. He is a person completely untouchable. Suddenly he heard from Adriana that she was very worried. "Wow," says the famous honor student. Apparently, she's no stranger to a little inferiority complex. So Charles went to work like a sailor. He wrote all the notes himself, supplemented them with elegant cheat sheets. In general, a complete set for passing the session. He had an excellent command of this particular discipline, financial law. Charles looked for Adriana and handed her the papers. She took them in her hands in amazement. "These are for you." The young man hastened modestly. Then there was a dialogue, as if from a famous cartoon. And for what? No reason. Although it is obvious to you and me that all this was not done for nothing, there was a reason. Adriana didn't know what to say. The guy went to such lengths for her. There was no one else who could have done more. Adriana realized that guys who called her to a club or a picnic would definitely ask for a response known to all. She did not want to give them the slightest reason to do so. Charles acted gratuitously, in a friendly manner, and this very much bought up the girl. As a token of her gratitude, Adriana invited Charles for coffee. On top of that, she had some lovely buns. They weren't alone. Jenna, Adriana's roommate, was still in the room. Sitting there, enjoying their coffee, talking. And then, as the saying goes, Charles got carried away. The young man ranted about the theater, movies, books, as if smoothly moved on to the mysteries of the universe, the afterlife, and even mentioned the composition of the Philosopher's Stone. Adriana listened to him, and her eyes widened. Oh boy, how erudite he was. It was incomprehensible. Adriana could not listen to us. His voice was calm, quiet, but very convincing. He seemed to know everything about everything. And what he didn't know, he made up very cleverly. Adriana even forgot about the coffee. She admired this guy, wondering how she had missed all his wonderful character traits before. How blind she had been. Charles looked like a Scandinavian warrior. Adriana had read in books. Suddenly, she pictured this young man in Viking armor. And you know what looked good on him. In the girl's fantasy, of course, it was obvious. Charles's ancestors came from the Nordic countries. Adriana decided to ask him about it. The boy readily answered that they were. He smiled. "Don't laugh. My ancestor's last name is Anderson. Doesn't it remind you of anything?" Adriana was amazed. She was discovering new facets of this man. It was as if she were reading an interesting book and couldn't get through it. Meanwhile, Charles switched to anecdotes. As experienced caventers, he was very skillful at it. The girls were grabbing their bellies listening to his funny stories. Adriana realized more and more that this man was becoming very close to her. Charles took a bite of Charlotte and looked as cute as a kitten. Immediately wanted to pet him on the head. Apparently, the lack of a man's shoulder was making itself felt. Of course, the girl restrained herself, but it was difficult for her. Suddenly, there was a rumble of thunder. As if by magic, it rained heavily, as if the bread of heaven was unfolded. Could it have rained like this during the flood? Adriana wondered to herself. What thoughts were going through her head? That's how she is affected by talking to this guy as becoming a real philosopher. Charles went to the window, looked outside, then turned guiltily to the girls. "Will I have to ask you for shelter? I don't have an umbrella or a jacket. I'm not sugar-coated, of course, but still." The girls unanimously declared that he should stay. There was no need for him to catch cold. Nevertheless, no one left him overnight. As soon as the rain eased, the young man began to pack, as they say, to go home, to the hut. Adriana immediately handed him her frivolous umbrella with a picture of Mickey Mouse on it. Charles accepted it like a precious gift. He said pathetically, "I'll guard it like the apple of my eye. I'll return it safely tomorrow, of course." The boy was very touched by the girl's concern. It seemed a trifle, but still even this trifle gave him a slight hope. Adriana laughed contagiously. Charles laughed too. Rita didn't understand what was so funny, but she laughed too, just in case. Charles gave a gallant, jocular curtsy. Charles nodded, made a handshake, and walked away. Adriana went to the window and looked at him for a long time. She was sorry to see this guy go, but after all, she would see him again tomorrow. That gave her hope. Adriana sighed and sat down to her textbooks. After all, no one canceled the session. She sat up until deep into the night. Around 03 Raw, when sleep began to finally overpower her, the girl fell asleep. Of course, she dreamt of Charles. They were standing on the stage together. There was a competition of KVN teams. Suddenly, Charles took a microphone in his hands and spoke into it. "Just a moment, attention, I have a very important announcement to make." The audience froze. Charles looked around with an attentive gaze and gave it to the mountain. "Please love and welcome my bride." The hall buzzed approvingly like a beehive. There was loud applause. And you know what? Adriana loved it. She woke up for a second and realized that it was just a dream. The girl sighed and went back to sleep. Let's find out what happened to Charles. He almost swam all the way home. If, let's say, such a pun, the guy was wet as if he were some kind of an outlandish sea animal. He entered the room. His room was obscenely small. Charles even thought it was smaller than Adriana's dorm room. "How do you bring your wife in here?" The guy splayed his hands in frustration, changed his clothes, and poured himself a stronger cup of coffee. A little cognac would have been nice. But Charles had no taste for alcoholic beverages. He looked at the boiling kettle and mentally went back in time. The kettle still remembered his mother. Charles remembered how carefully she used to put it on the stove and drink her delicious cocoa, sweet and milky. They seemed to be the best moments of his life. It was a pity they would never happen again. The guy remembered that he hadn't opened the umbrella to dry it. The umbrella was an imported automatic umbrella. As he pressed the button, he saw dozens of Mickey Mouse smiling at him in a friendly manner. It was like a greeting from Adriana. Charles smiled back and even waved his hand. Just then he caught himself thinking that he had lived to see it. The guy is already waving at the mice that are pictured above the umbrella. Something definitely needs to be done about that. What's there to do about it? Ha! There's no cure for love. The guy imagined for a second that Adriana had agreed to be his girlfriend. They walked along the alleys, holding hands, exposing their faces to the warm spring wind. It became warm and cozy on the soul, so much so that the song, "Ah, If My Dream" from the cartoon Flying Ship came true. It was his favorite cartoon. Besides books and theater, Charles was very fond of cartoons, but was shy to talk about it. Now he felt at ease. No one saw him, so he could improvise. His song was interrupted by the whistle of the kettle. Charles thought he was singing. Another time, at a wedding with Adriana, he poured cheap instant coffee into a mug, thought about whether or not to put sugar in it. Decided against it. Charles took a sip of the scalding beverage. Despite the strong coffee, Charles fell asleep like a baby. Into the morning, he woke up with a strange feeling. His whole body was broken. He had chills. The boy struggled to get up. He put himself a thermometer. The medical device showed a temperature of 38.7. The heavy rain had done its work. Charles had caught a sore throat. The sharp pain in his throat was evidence of that. The boy was very upset. He had a session coming up, too. Although soccer. On the other hand, temperature is quite a good reason to sit at home, drunk with aspedriap and paracetamol. Charles called the institute and said he was sick. He laid down under warm blankets and relaxed. The reason for his illness was a visit to Adriana. But the guy was even happy that such a meeting took place. Probably a person in love becomes not only a romantic, but also a bit of a fool, but, mind you, a happy fool. The guy turned on the old TV. Surprisingly, there was a Mickey Mouse cartoon on one of the channels. Materialist. To the depths of his soul, Charles suddenly thought that it was fate itself that was showing the cartoon. Maybe it was the high temperature that influenced it. Nevertheless, the guy, wrapped in a blanket, watched this Disney cartoon. For some reason, the cartoon Mickey suddenly became his mascot. With these thoughts, Charles fell into a deep, leaden sleep. He slept for about 5 hours. Meanwhile, Adriana meditated before the session, like samurai before a battle. She had her own special ritual. She applied discreet makeup, wore her favorite gray pantsuit, sets with her favorite perfume. It was Kenzo. What did Mom get her? Sending herself to hell. Adriana went to the institute. She jolted in the corners of the streetcar. To the institution where the girl was studying, it was 5 stops. Out of boredom, Adriana pulled out a notebook that contained the guy's notes. He had brought it just in case Adriana might need it. Leafing through the notebook, Adriana froze on one of the sheets. She saw herself. The drawing was made with a simple pencil, but so realistic as if it were a photograph. The girl was amazed at such talent of the young man. Are there any industries at all in which Charles would not be proficient? So far, Adriana had not noticed any. Here was indeed God's spark of a nugget. Suddenly, the girl realized she was praising this guy too much. Does it mean that? And the girl hurriedly pushed those pesky thoughts away. She's been thinking about this guy too much lately. As they say, it's time to do the honors. She had a session ahead of her. No matter how much Adriana looked for him, there was no sign of him at the institute. Some inner voice told Adriana that something bad had happened to Charles. She visited the group where the boy was studying and was told that Charles was ill. It was more than unexpected. The girl immediately realized that the cold was caused by yesterday's rain. Adriana was determined to visit Charles, having first learned his home address. He lived nearby, in an old house that he remembered, probably from Churchill's time. This is yes, this is the cherished house number 19. Adriana went up to the second floor. On the wall hung 5 bells. Opposite each bell was a last name. For convenience, Adriana pressed the bell next to the last name, Stone. The door was not opened for a long time. Adriana rang the bell again. After a couple minutes, footsteps sounded behind the door. The door opened, and Charles stood on the threshold with his nose red beyond belief. You gasped with delight. Charles. How are you feeling? Adriana answered with a question. Better, Charles replied, and smiled much better. He invited her in, desperately embarrassed. Indeed, the setting was more than Spartan. To put it mildly, the setting was poverty-stricken. To say the least, it was exactly what Charles was very embarrassed about. He was afraid that Adriana would be frightened by all this meager furnishings, turn 360 degrees, and run away. A normal person who had grown up in a normal environment would have been frightened by this interior. But Adriana pretended not to notice the shabby walls, the rotten floors, or the dilapidated ceiling that was about to fall in. The boy escorted her to her room. Charles began to fidget, something he had never noticed before. He handed Adriana an umbrella. She blushed and took it in her hands. Then she realized and put the umbrella away. Like a magician, Adriana began to pull citrus fruits, medicines, and juices out of the Charles looked at her. Was it all for him? She waved him as she continued to talk. Charles was shocked. He had expected to see anyone but Adriana in his house. It was as if a celestial had come down from Olympus and brought him tangerines. He was touched and surprised. He smiled and said in his manner, "Now I will definitely cheer every day." "If you agree to take care of me like that, I would not advise you to talk like that," Adriana replied. "After all, everyone knows that thoughts are material." Charles wanted to open his mouth on the subject. He had read somewhere an extensive work on the subject. Now he wanted to inform Adriana about it. She politely dismissed him with her hand. "You can tell me another time. Right now, you should go to bed and get a thermometer." 10 minutes later, Charles pulled out a thermometer from under his arm. It read 37 and 4. It wasn't high, but it wasn't good either. Meanwhile, Adriana asked the boy where the kitchen was. He pointed across 2 rooms to the left. Adriana stepped resolutely into that room. On the communal table, she laid out the food and began to prepare dinner. All the classics: chicken broth, fried potatoes with mushrooms, sandwiches, rose hip broth, some sweets. She was so engrossed in the cooking process that she didn't even notice Charles quietly enter the kitchen. He was coughing slightly. Adriana turned around at the voice. "You need to lie down." "I will." "I'll help you," Charles told her. "I can't have my guest here as a cook and no cook at all." Adriana objected. "Consider that I have taken the patronage over you from the Institute. Do you understand?" "With my head, I understand, but not with my heart," said Charles. "Nevertheless, it's a pleasure, and it's a pleasure to cook for you," said Adriana. "I almost forgot," she exclaimed and ran into the room. Charles brought out trot, so you won't believe it, an indoor rose. She put it on the windowsill. "This is your oxygen generator," Adriana said solemnly. "I read somewhere that the Chinese are very fond of these flowers. Roses can absorb all harmful bacteria without dying. So please love and applaud. This is your personalized absorbed germs." The young men laughed. They made their way into the room. Adriana took out a notebook from her purse and handed it to Charles. She said gratefully, "Thank you for the additional literature. I especially liked the illustrations. Where did you learn to draw like that?" "I went to art school," Charles replied modestly. "Not for long, a couple of years. But they gave me the first basics of painting. I didn't want you to see that. Well, now that you've seen it, maybe we should start talking." Adriana didn't mind. It was long overdue. Charles was in favor with both hands. Then they had lunch, looking at each other carefully now and then. Charles was especially attentive. Adriana caught his attentive gaze, blushed, and did not know what to say. She herself was very curious to look into his eyes, but the girl was desperately shy. Finally, she moved into herself. The squirrels began to play at looking. Meanwhile, the wall clock read 1800. It was time to say goodbye. Charles is still weak. He needs rest, but some force just wouldn't let Adriana go. One half of her mind was eager to go, the other half fervently opposed it. This was the kind of bipolar split personality Adriana was tormenting. Suddenly, the girl realized that she felt so good at this particular second that she wished this moment could last for an eternity. She couldn't even remember when she'd felt this good. "Stop, moment, you're perfect," flashed through her mind. She looked at Semyon carefully once more. During this day, he had managed to become so dear to her, as if the girl had known the guy all her life, as if they were old acquaintances. And such a feeling is worth a lot. However, Charles had to go. It was obvious that Adriana had to go. But his heart didn't want to let her go. Meanwhile, Adriana gave him clear instructions. These pills drink twice a day. You see the white and red packaging. If you have a fever, drink paracetamol. If the temperature will not be very high, do not drink paracetamol. Let the body fight the bacteria on its own, and all in the same way. Charles nodded importantly and said, "Yes, doctor, it will be done, doctor." The young men laughed synchronously. Adriana left. Charles went back to his room. He closed the door tightly behind him, sat down on the couch, and asked him to do it. Adriana had shown him loyalty, and it's probably not just an off-duty visit. Girls don't just go around like that. Well, at least he wanted to think so. The guy went to the kitchen and ate some goodies with pleasure. What had Adriana prepared for him? This was the day that started their relationship. It was November 18th. Adriana and Charles felt it immediately. How could they not feel a feeling that was almost tangible? You could touch it with your hands. It was so tangible. Some time passed, Charles recovered and returned to his studies. He and Adriana were often seen together. Rumors spread around the institute. What's the big deal? They'd been called Romeo and Juliet for years. It was time to live up to that high-profile nickname. No matter how close Adriana and Charles were, the guy didn't force the issue at all. He did not pester the girl, did not make ambiguous hints to her. This kind of chivalrous behavior pleased the girl even more. His stamina amazed her. Adriana even wondered when Charles would cross that line, But Charles was in no hurry to do so. They walked in parks, squares, and alleys, sometimes going to cafes and drinking tea or coffee. Charles took his girlfriend to the movies, theaters, exhibitions. Everywhere he demonstrated excellent manners. Adriana looked at him every day from a different angle and was amazed at how good this man was. Charles did not play any role, just behaved as his heart told him to. The session had come to an end, and the young people had passed it brilliantly. No one doubted it. On this occasion, the students organized a traditional badge on the clearing by the lake. This tradition was already a proverb, and the lake was called Student Lake, although geographically it was called Spruce Lake. The views here were truly stunning. The lake was small in size and looked more like a pond, but the abundance of vegetation made it a truly fabulous place. It was as if various characters, water mermaids, Kikimora lived here. But it is wrong to think that the students camped there as savages. For them, the school management had set up a special camping site. It was called Buravestnik. Of course, it is not a 5-star recreation center, but all the attributes of an active vacation were there. Also in the camping were cozy gauges and barbecue areas, volleyball court, a small pier, to which several boats were moored. All in all, quite a cozy place. Accommodating the students in the campground fell entirely on Adriana's shoulders. Charles volunteered to help her. The process was quite laborious. There was a lot of paperwork and forms to fill out. Then it was necessary to make lists of students, to assign each one a cottage. There was a lot of red tape. In general, there was enough work to take a break from this routine. Charles invited the girl to the theater. They were staging his favorite Bulgakov's Master and Margarita. It was a crime to miss such a production. To his surprise, Adriana did not agree immediately. It is not known for what reason she put on the mask of a businessman, although between you and me, the girl was very interested to see this particular production. The fact is that this play was staged by the famous director Bukowski that actively cooperated with many famous actors. That became famous for the fact that he had recently received an Oscar for Best Actor. Although it was obvious to Charles, he had long ago realized the delicate nature of the girl. She wasn't the kind of girl who would throw herself into anything with just a finger on the mani. Although there was no grave here. Everything was rankly noble, the master and Margarita, Bulgakov. Evening. Adriana didn't think long, though. She just took Orot Carifaro as a courtesy. Then, the girl informed Charles that she agreed that it was a crime to miss Bukowski's premiere. The theater, where Charles Adriana invited Charles, was called Omi Beads. It was quite an old building, which the city authorities recognized as an asset of architecture and cultural heritage. The play was simply marvelous. The acting was top-notch. Charles himself was top-notch. He behaved very gallantly, demonstrating refined manners. And how does this Jungie from the 20th century know how to behave? Probably because Charles was a passionate fan of books. He read with great pleasure a work about the culture of the 19th century in Russia, absorbing, like a sponge, all the gestures, phrases, expressions of people of that time. This Tyrus extremely bought up Adriana. As a hereditary noblewoman, she considered herself as such. She was very pleased with such behavior. After the performance, they walked leisurely along the tennis alleys, ate ice cream, and discussed the play. Their opinion was unanimous. It was brilliant. Both were passionate fans of the work. There was much to talk about. Adriana carefully clutched a bouquet of white lilies in her hands. Charles was displeased in Finanza. He had come back and had managed to purchase the most beautiful flowers for his girlfriend. Adriana felt like a true queen, like Queen Margot. Strictly speaking, no one had ever given a girl flowers before. Though no, not like that. Flowers had been offered to her. Adriana herself had never accepted them. She had always thought that bouquets meant a lot. Their summer had been the happiest ever. So it seemed to them. The young people enjoyed each other's company, enjoying every second of communication. They went on hikes, theaters, movies, cafes. It seemed to them that the world revolved only around them. At that moment, there was no one happier in the world. Then, Adriana's parents showed up out of the blue. At that very moment, Charles was visiting her room. Seeing the handsome young man, her parents and grandmother looked at him. It was obvious that their girl had found a beau, and a handsome one at that. They were very happy for her. It was enough to devote all their time only to study. It was time to take care of her personal life. Charles once again showed his impeccable manners as an aristocrat. He kissed the lady's marin, his hands in turn, and shook hands with the man. Everyone was extremely pleased with this acquaintance. With the arrival of September came a new school year, the 4th year for the young men. It was joyful, easy, and relaxed. They had each other, which meant that any difficulty was within their reach. Young people had a favorite spot. Everyone called it the Bridge of Love.
The reason is that after the wedding, the newlyweds went to this bridge and hung locks on it. The locks symbolize the strength of feelings and the importance of family life. Charles and Adriana often walked across this bridge, looked down at the river, and dreamed of their future life. To both of them, it seemed surprisingly cozy, attractive, and full of love and harmony. 2 months passed. Adriana decided to move in with Charles.
In the same shabby little room, she managed to create a unique homey coziness that Charles had forgotten. There were pots of flowers on the windows and beautiful paintings on the walls. A small table Adriana shot with an elegant tablecloth. The boy looked at his room and did not recognize it at all. It was as if he had come to visit and stayed here with Adriana. The girl had an innate talent to create a hunting atmosphere of coziness and warmth around her. She herself was the embodiment of home. Hearth, like a Greek goddess. At least, that's how she seemed to the guy on December 25th, Catholic Christmas. Adriana realized she was pregnant. 2 stripes on the test told about it very clearly.
The girl wondered how to tell her Charles. Would he react correctly? What would he say? To be honest, she was a little scared. Even if Charles would misunderstand her.
Adriana was ashamed to come home like this, with a huge belly and without the diploma she was so eagerly after. What would her parents say? How would her grandmother look into her eyes? Adriana had a persistent sense of dread. She wanted more and more to talk to Charles about it, but for some reason she put it off. What was it that frightened her so much? She couldn't explain it herself, but nevertheless, she couldn't turn her tongue numb and refusing to tell Charles this important news. Adriana knew that she had a couple of weeks to make a decision. Positive or negative, i.e. to keep the baby or go for an abortion. She had to do exactly what the guy told her to do. There was no third way. Adriana sat in the kitchen, drinking tea, and imagining Charles giving her a stern reprimand. Why did you rush into this? We're not even strong enough to stand on our own 2 feet yet. Are our apartments decent? No. Where will we live with the baby? In this hallway, 12 meters each. We both have incomplete higher education, so I'm going to be a loader unloading coal cars? No, I can't do that. Charles was stomping his feet and gesticulating desperately. Of course, it was only a figment of the girl's imagination. Nevertheless, the fact frightened her. What would happen if he reacted that way? Then there would be a real catastrophe. Hell on earth. That evening, Charles brought the Christmas tree. The forest beauty was beautiful to look at. After the boy put it on, it looked just like a Kremlin Christmas tree, but in a smaller format. The guy asked Adriana with a satisfied look, "And how do you like our plants? Chic?" "Yes." Adriana agreed, nodding. The tree was amazing. After Charles had hung the garland and turned off the lights, the room had taken on a real Christmas color, fairy and mystical. You'd think if you called Santa Claus, he'd come right away, and he'd bring the snow maiden with him. It'll be fun. But that's not what we're talking about now. Adriana was thinking about her stomach. It was these thoughts that were ruining her New Year's Eve mood. Charles noticed that there was something wrong with the girl. It was clearly visible in her appearance. Adriana was extremely tense and very scared. It was evident in her eyes. "What's wrong with you?" asked Charles. Are you not feeling well?" There was obviously something going on with Adriana, but what it was another question. Adriana didn't answer anything definite. She said she was just tired from the day, and they went to the kitchen. Charles began to fantasize about how to celebrate New Year's Eve in a way that would be memorable. When Charles began to list the dishes he planned to have on the New Year's Eve table, Adriana seemed to burst into tears. She drew more air into her chest and blurted out that she was expecting a baby. Then she froze, waiting for the guy's reaction. He remained silent, as if weighing the situation. Adriana was shaking with fear of how he would react. Would he find the right words for it? In exactly 1 minute, Charles was glowing. "Yay! We're having a baby! I'm so happy!" Adriana felt as if a stone had fallen from her soul. She exhaled and let herself relax for the first time in a long time. Thank God the guy reacted as he should. That much was obvious. He'd done the manly thing once again. It would seem, and his joy was unbounded. He was ready to hug and kiss the whole world. But since the whole world wasn't available, he started circling Adriana around the room. "In the new year, we will be the truest family." "Just you and me?" Charles shouted enthusiastically. "And our baby," Adriana added. "Of course," shouted Charles. "And our baby." No matter how well the parents felt about the boy, Adriana decided to be cautious. How will they react to this marriage? After all, it's happening so fast, they would say. There were more questions than answers. Of course, all with a chorus of displeasure. Such a reason for the wedding was unpleasant to say
the least. The child was to be conceived in a family, not in a small room in a communal house. Nevertheless, Adriana was the happiest person on this planet. She had Charles, and she had a child who would soon be born.
And let her parents react rather harshly, because she had her own life to live, and no one else's.
Charles has devoted himself to gambling to make money.
A pregnant woman requires a lot of expenses, so the guy began to work like an ox. He took on absolutely everything: unloaded rail cars, wrote tests, translated texts, and even traded at the market on weekends. All this money he immediately spent on fruit, vitamins, and things for the future baby. Charles did not forget to take care of the increased nutrition of his nondescript Aunt Pen. It was very important for her. At this point, he completely took over all the household chores. The guy did not let Adriana take in his hands a rag, vacuum cleaner, wash dishes, cook. All this he took on his still masculine shoulders. Adriana felt more secure than ever. It was as if the guy had built a huge brick wall around her. Armor provided. This position was the envy of all Adriana's friends. The girls were desperately jealous of her. Of course, they knew all this from Adriana's story. The wedding was modest, but a lot of fun. It was held in a cafe called Cheremushki. Mom and Dad came to this momentous event. Grandma couldn't make it. She had high blood pressure. The old lady verbally conveyed greetings, awe, and best wishes. Gifts for the wedding were modest, but very nice. After the celebration, Adriana and Charles left for their home. As a gift, the parents presented a crib and a stroller. It was very relevant at the moment. Adriana and Charles were very grateful to them for this. They could not have wished for a better gift at this time. Adriana made a small remodeling of the small room with Charles's hands. They blocked it off with plywood, a wall. It's much more cozy. They covered this partition with cheerful wallpaper, and the place near the window automatically turned into a nursery. A very true and accurate design decision. If there's no other way out, after a little thought, Adriana added a lot of indoor plants to the decor, and the room immediately turned into a blooming garden, like a biblical Eden. Living in such a room became cozy, comfortable, and joyful. It seemed to both of them that there was no place on earth better than this little room. That's exactly what people say. Heaven is for the sweetest. Adriana would have signed every word, but one room wasn't enough for Adriana. With the same passion, she shimmered the wallpaper in the common hallway. Adriana cleaned up the bathroom, scrubbing it to crystal clarity. Charles looked at all this and marveled at how lucky he was to have a wife. A real mistress has to be a mom. She's going to be great. He couldn't believe his happiness. However, something marred their cloudless existence. As always, it was the neighbors. They were a rather strange family. Their last name was Viper. There were 3 people living in the same room as Charles. There was the father Michael, his wife Camille, and a fat sack named Rick and their son. It was the Vipers who were putting sticks in the wheels of the young family. They blatantly piggybacked, started the nastiness, and did everything they could to get the young family to leave their legal. 12 meters sooner? It seemed to them that, after the birth of the child in the apartment, will begin a real chaos. They didn't know exactly, but for some reason they thought so. So this noble quote-unquote family, they were making petty nuisances of themselves and creating obstacles and messes. It was a mess in the kitchen. What did Camille leave behind? The bathroom, too, lost its former freshness very quickly. Michael could be thanked for that. He deliberately didn't flush after going to the toilet. Shurik was also doing his part. With the keys to the apartment, he scratched the wallpaper, which Adriana had so lovingly conquered. Several times Charles went to their house for a real showdown. He made his demands and claims to the family in plain text. As usual, they would look at him with rounded eyes and say that they didn't know what they were talking about. Then Charles grabbed Michael by the scruff of the neck like a kitten and poked his nose into all his faults. The skinny little man swore and swore it wasn't them, several times even by his and his wife's mother. But neither Adriana nor Charles believed them. Nevertheless, they had to reconcile and coexist peacefully. There was nowhere to go. The relationship with her parents was heating up.
Adriana had no hope for them anymore. Charles got a job at a car service. The money there was pretty decent, and the cars were a selection of expensive foreign cars.
For one diagnosis, you could get a few 1,000, which was just a cosmic sum for a young family. It would seem that life was getting better. On July 31st, our son James was born. The boy was quite large, 4 kilograms, which is very flattering to the father. He was a big guy himself. Now he has a rich heir. Adriana devoted herself to her son. Charles also tried not to be late at work when the car service closed. He immediately rushed home, where he was eagerly awaited by his favorite family. As the years passed, the boy grew up and his parents were able to breathe a little. Adriana began to study again. At the same time, she worked part-time in one of the firms that was engaged in the realization of apartments in the city. It was called Good House. Charles also achieved a lot of success at work. From a simple locksmith, he became a manager and took requests for repairs. Of course, his income went up many times. The guy dressed in a strict suit bought himself model shoes. On his wrist shone luxury watch. In short, he turned into a real dandy. Meanwhile, James was assigned to a kindergarten where he willingly went. He really liked to spend time in the company of peers. He grew up very sociable and mobile. Parents liked it very much. With such indicators, the boy will achieve a lot. As practice shows, active people achieve heights. And the fact that James is very active, no one doubted. It was time to improve the housing issue. Favor nearby began to build a residential area of a new type under the capacious name Scarlet Sails. In the center of this complex rose a caravel with sails stretched from the wind. As a specialist in real estate sales, Adriana noticed this particular complex. The apartments here were bright, cozy, and quite affordable. The young family in principle, pulled them. The choice stopped on a 3-room apartment with an improved layout. The balcony overlooked the river. It was doubly pleasant. However, a man assumes, and God disposes. Something happened that no one expected. The global financial system began to collapse like a house of cards. Prices went up, wages went down. Many people were left on the streets unclaimed. Unemployment rose in the city. People were willing to work for pennies on the dollar. No? Big businesses started closing down. The auto body shop that Charles worked at closed down. There was just nothing left to fix. Gasoline prices went up obscenely. Many motorists simply refused to drive their vehicles. It was like some kind of post-apocalypse. Suddenly, the company Adriana worked for went bankrupt. Both spouses went to the labor exchange and were paid a miserable allowance, but it was only enough for bread and some rudimentary food. Both of them were getting desperate. In the meantime, James had started 3rd grade. Of course, he had to be fed and clothed. Both spouses were becoming increasingly depressed, but it was easy to just sit around. Instead of sprinkling their heads with ashes, they needed to take decisive action. Suddenly, Charles voiced a bold idea. Even though gasoline was getting more expensive, but still the city needed transportation. His acquaintances whispered to him that the city needed a shuttle bus. The man searched the internet and found a very favorable offer in Vladivostok. It was in this city that it was possible to buy excellent Toyota or Honda minibuses at very attractive prices. The budding entrepreneur got into huge debts. This money would be enough for the first car. He signed a contract with the city administration for the supply of those cars and decided to realize his bold plan. The man's profit would amount to decent money. In Vladivostok, The cars were sold for mere pennies. At least the Maneragstano. The man saw no other way out of the situation. Adriana was against such a thing. Nevertheless, her son had to be fed. You can't explain to him that there's a crisis in the country. You want to eat, as they say, every day. And more than once. Anyway, she blessed her husband for this trip. Risk is a noble thing, and if the trip works out, they will be, as they say, in chocolate. Then Charles planned to hire a few people and put the transportation of cars on the stream. It was possible to make a decent fortune in 1 year, then live happily ever after, if that was possible in the current situation. Charles was going on the road like a professional paratrooper to Afghanistan. In addition to money, acquaintances gave him even a rifle. There was little chance that something might happen on the road. In addition, Charles had a baseball bat and a couple of other interesting gadgets. He had loaded it all into a large backpack. Actually, there were no searches on the train. They could be freely transported to the city in the Far East. And then Charles simply got into the car, put the weapons next to it, and calmly returned back. Thor! That was his plan. Charles calculated to go to his hometown by car at cruising speed about 146 hours. Why, in principle, it would not be long. He would return the car to the administration, get the necessary money, and return to Vladivostok again. So, several times. After the orfot that, he hires a group of like-minded people, and they collectively, so to speak, cooperatively, start to drive Japanese transport. Moreover, among the orders from the administration were also trucks. So Charles was provided with a lot of work. He arrived like a Greek warrior, with a shield on a magnificent white minibus. This car was very much liked by the automobile company, and it was customary to let such vehicles on the route. The man became enthusiastic. Life no longer seemed so dull to him. A year passed. Charles put on stream the supply of cars in the city. People from other cities began to come to him, ordering this or that model of car. Charles carefully studied the market, made his own adjustments, and offered the most suitable transportation options. It turned out to be something like a small transportation company. Business was booming. 3 more years passed. Charles had already established a large firm, and the cars were no longer coming from Vladivostok, but from Europe. And they were no longer budget Japanese, they were top-of-the-range models of German brands. Eventually, they managed to buy an excellent home. The house became a full cup, the bank accounts were growing, the country was getting calmer, the financial crisis was slowly settling down. From the neighboring region came an order for the delivery of top electric cars from China. They wanted to provide a cab service with them. Now it was very popular to staff exactly electric cars and cabs. As soon as the battery charge ran out, the car would stand up to charge like a cell phone. No gasoline or diesel. Anyway, Charles made a very lucrative deal for a few hundred 1,000. He had partners in China who offered the most attractive prices in the country. Charles had built up a reputation. His firm rattled almost the entire country, and not just in southern Russia. Adriana opened a chain of bookstores. Books had always been her passion. She bought children's books in bright, colorful covers from publishers. She named her chain after Adriana. In addition to books, the stores carried stationery, kits for school children, puzzles, and board games. Well, what can I say? Life was booming. Both Charles and Adriana loved their new life. Could they have dreamed of such a life just a few years ago? Of course not. James, too, was growing up and doing well in school. His grades were pleasing his parents and teachers. The boy was interested in computers and dreamed of becoming an IT specialist. Parents approved this choice. Now, this profession is in great demand on the labor market. In general, they blessed the boy for it. let him grow, develop, and then he would become, like Pavel Durov, write his own social network or something like that. Time passed, James grew up. After graduating from high school, he moved to the capital. There were huge opportunities for his new profession there. His parents did not keep him, but on the contrary, encouraged him in every possible way. Let the lad gain capital experience, and if he stays there, then, no big deal. There are more opportunities than in their town. Charles developed a new hobby, hunting. He bought several hunting rifles made in Spain and spent all his free time in the woods. Charles brought home game, which Adriana enjoyed cooking. She did not condemn her husband for this bloody hobby. After all, back in the old days, men used to bring mammoths into the cave. Charles never brought a mammoth. However, game was always in their diet. Everything fell apart like a house of cards. Completely by chance, Adriana herself still can't believe what happened. But what is to be is not to be avoided. Apparently, it was fate's will. One day, Charles, as usual, tired but satisfied, returned from hunting. Instead of ducks, pheasants, or osatina, he brought fish. To his wife's question, where did the fish come from? Charles evasively replied that the hunt had been completely unsuccessful. He and his buddy went to the nearest lake, where they caught these excellent carp. Adriana didn't sense any trickery. She took the fish to the kitchen in the evening to fry it in sour cream. Charles, after dumping his ammunition in the hallway, went to take a shower himself. It was this trip to the shower that proved fatal to the happy family. Adriana started the laundry, her husband's expensive camouflage smelling mercilessly of fish. She picked it up to throw it into the washing machine. Suddenly, a cell phone fell out of one of her pockets. The phone was the simplest push button. That meant it didn't have any protection on it. Of course, it is not a good idea to pick up things that do not belong to you. That was a rule Adriana had always adhered to. But at this moment, she was very curious as to what this anachronism was kept in her husband's pocket. She was familiar with the model, so she had no trouble getting into the contact list. There was only one contact, and it was called Bunny. Certainly Charles had not called the beast of the forest. Then who was this mysterious bunny? Adriana decided to find out. She went out onto the balcony and pressed the green button. Exactly 5 seconds later, a pleasant young female voice answered her. "Yes, my favorite," the lady said languidly. "How are you?" "I made it." "How's your chicken?" "I was surprised I didn't bring any game." "But it's okay. I bought carp for her at the market, so she can fry them." Most surprisingly, Adriana didn't say a word. She just pressed the call button and the woman started to park herself. The woman didn't say anything back to her rival. She simply turned off the connection. She felt like the sky was about to fall right on her head. Had all these years living together been for nothing? Adriana didn't believe it. However, there is a presumption of innocence. Charles's guilt had not been proven. But it was necessary to find out who this bunny with such a pleasant voice was. Adriana did the following. She texted the contact. In the message, the woman indicated the location and time, wrote that the wife is watching, and there is no way to talk. The reply was short but succinct. Well, Adriana did not say anything to the spouse. They had dinner and went to bed. The next day, Adriana approached the building of the entertainment complex. It had the apt name of Leisure Planet. It was 4:00 on the clock. That was the time Adriana had indicated in her text message.
There was no one around. 10 minutes passed, but no one showed up. Suddenly, a cab pulled up. A spectacular blonde woman of about 25 got out of it. Adriana watched her from the bench. The blonde walked rather nervously, glancing at her watch. Exactly 20 minutes later, the girl hailed a cab and left in an unknown direction. It was obvious it was she, Adriana's rival, who had returned home and waited for her husband. She didn't beat around the bush. She simply took an A4 sheet of paper, drew an improvised hair on it, put a question mark next to it, and silently handed it to her husband. He looked at the drawing and turned pale.
Everything became clear to him in an instant. He did not deny it, and immediately laid it all out as it was. He brought the bunny from Vladivostok. The girl worked in a firm that dealt with car deliveries. Charles rambled that it was unknown how it happened, but they had Evelyn and love. All this time, Adriana was silent. What is there to say when they have Evelyn and love? There was absolutely nothing to say. The next day, she filed for divorce. James was an adult. The divorce was finalized in record time. Charles behaved like a true gentleman, and Adriana's stores were transferred to a number of assets of the man. However, this city pressed like a press on Adriana's shoulders, and she decided to radically change her life. Adriana sold the business and used the proceeds to buy a modest house in the village of Aprikosov near the Blue Sea. And who is Ethan, you ask? Remember, we mentioned him at the beginning. It's very simple. Ethan is Adriana's new husband. They met by chance. The lights went out in Adriana's house after a huge hurricane, and when the storm passed, the woman's head was spinning. All the wires were lying on the beds black, thick, like a snake. It was the ultimate disaster. Suddenly, she heard a pleasant male voice. It was coming from behind the fence. It turned out that Ethan was an expert on all things electrical. A profession, so to speak. The man coped with all the cliffhangers. After that, he said that he was visiting Adriana's neighbors. He himself lives in the city. Let's not go into the details of their affair. Everything happened very quickly, one might say, impetuously. Both the man and the woman were no longer at the age to oohing and ahing. They modestly signed and began to live together quietly and peacefully, soul to soul. Ethan proved himself to be a quiet, tactful man with good manners. What's that got to do with manners? Charles, as we remember, also had impeccable manners. So impeccable that he managed to betray his wife, although, Adriana forgave him long ago. Living with a bunny? Good riddance. Adriana visits James and his young wife very often. They have a daughter. They named her Emily in honor of Adriana's grandmother. The guy has achieved tremendous success in the field of IT. He became the author of a popular computer game, which was almost ripped off in the West. Now James has his own company, which develops computer games. They do not even remember their father. God is his judge. Adriana enjoys babysitting little Emily. They very often go sailing on their own yacht. The yacht is simple but very comfortable. It is professionally managed by Ethan. He's a former Navy man. No, it is great to live on the sea, to feel like a real person in unity with nature, to be a part of this huge space. If Adriana is asked if she has any regrets, the woman will not hesitate to answer. No, she has no regrets. Everything that happened to her in life is just a necessary experience. Without it, she could not realize what in this life is significant and what is secondary. How can you tell a traitor from a truly honest man? She is grateful to her ex-husband for help. In difficult moments of life, for support, for warmth, care, affection. May he be happy with his Evelyn. Adriana wishes happiness to everyone in general. After all, as she used to say, and now she does not get tired of repeating the thought she is material. Therefore, it is worth keeping in your head only the kindest, positive, and wise thoughts, and they will definitely acquire a shell. And what will be the shell? Everyone decides for himself. Now, Adriana's philosophy is to wish the whole world happiness every day, every minute, every second of your life. And then, the world will respond in the same way. Will give you great human happiness. Let's just say that this is the Adriana religion now. And who says it is wrong?